Hi, my name is Praveen Suthrum. I'm the president of NextServices. Thank you for joining me. And what you're about to see are three interviews with GI leaders who have been involved with clinical research. Like many of you, I've been very interested to learn about what is the right way to go about building a clinical research ancillary in gastroenterology. In this interview, you will meet three people. The first is Dr. Murali, a gastroenterologist based in South Carolina. He's done clinical research for the last 25 years, and you will learn how the field has evolved over the years. The second interview is with Dr. Don Lazas, a gastroenterologist from Tennessee, and he's also the co-founder of a company called ObjectiveGI. ObjectiveGI helps GI practices get started with their research initiatives, and you will learn about why he began his company and how to work with them. The third interview is with Dr. Chris Fourment. From the beginning of his career, he's been focused on clinical research as an ancillary. He's worked with large groups such as Texas Digestive and helped them develop their program. He is today the president and CEO of Clinical Research Strategy Group and Precision Research. Like me, I'm sure you'll find all of these interviews very, very insightful. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them and I'll be sure to get back. Thank you.
So when I was in training, I used to be very closely aligned with the clinical trials manager at the University of Kentucky, where I trained. And Professor McLean, who has so much foresight and an amazing mentor, encouraged us to be deeply involved in these trials. You know, we were not just hanging around doing sundry work, but he made us understand what trials involve, how it is done, what is the ethics. We got a good grounding in it. So when I started my practice, it naturally came to me to seek out clinical trials. Of course, everything has changed. We used to do these trials quite easily in those days because there was less paperwork. So I started my first clinical trial in the first year of my practice. For some reason, I was very, very busy from the very first day I started. So by the third month, I was seeing a lot of patients. And initially, there were a lot of drugs that were being tested for reflux, for ulcers, for heartburn, for hepatitis C. You know, we just got involved in almost all of the trials. And for some reason, the sponsors also tended to gravitate towards my practice. So I've always had a steady interest, both from patients and also especially from the sponsors. Until about 10 years ago, the paperwork was manageable. Today, they have created multiple layers. So you not only have the same or more paperwork, but you have more scrutiny and the need for very accurate paper trail to support your electronic documentation. It's the other way around. So we have to have three systems. One is the study binder, which has to be still it's a round file with all kinds of information. And every paper in that has to match what is in the electronic case report forms, which is the electronic EMR version of the whole thing. And third, if, as you know, in my case, I maintain records through chronological PDF files, so it has to match that as well. You have to establish SOPs for everything you do, that is standard operating procedures, so that you have a uniform policy of distributing information, authenticating your papers, and being able to account for what you do. It's very hard. If you just have some EMR, you can't just do that. It's very hard. So you would think an EMR would make your life easy, but it can also make it very complicated. So now what the trial designers have done is they replicated the paper version using the electronic version. So we are supposed to keep all these records for many years. Come to think of it, the amount of storage space that I need has become a big problem for me. So with as many trials as we have done over the years, I have to have these boxes which contain all these materials. We send samples. They all take up a lot of space. Everything is sent frozen. So, these are bulky containers. I can't squeeze them. I can't compact them. So all these things have to be thought of. So it takes up usable space in my office. I do these trials for only one reason, which is to stay ahead of the game and to offer my patients the very best of the options for treatment. Today, my focus is completely on inflammatory bowel disease. So I have concurrently about 8 or 9 clinical trials going on in my practice at this time. So there is a steady flow of patients, very busy. And as you know, my wife Anu, who is a scientist, gave up her job to help me. And today she is the trials director, and she's also the sub-investigator on all the trials with me. She wears so many hats. Without her, I would be doing nothing. So she really helps me do all these trials correctly. And she understands the regulatory matters very well because she's an MSCR. It depends on the size of the practice. In a large practice, you can afford to hire a full-time staff to direct the trials. Then you can hire subordinate staff to do the blood draws, to handle the specimens, to the ECRF entries, all these things. You can delegate the work. Then remember that all comes with payroll, right? So you are increasing the payroll. Clinical trials are not a way to make a lot of money, although it may seem like that. If you just look at the raw numbers, you say, oh my gosh, you got paid $100,000 or more. But then much of it is going towards other expenses. So it is a labor-intensive task. And if your motive is to make a lot of money, look elsewhere. Number one is to have a very good trials manager who is willing to do a lot of other things early on in the business, because initially you will not be very busy. So when you're having only 1 or 2 trials, you can't afford to have the level of staffing that big organizations have. So that person should really closely work with you. There must be clear understanding between the PI, which is me, and my staff as to what their delegated duties are. They have to put patients first. So, we need to have the patient volume to support the trials. For example, because of my focus on IBD, I have a very large IBD practice. So I see a lot of patients with inflammatory bowel disease. And many of them come from a 3-state area to my practice. So if I do want to recruit, it is very easy for me to recruit patients. I don't usually advertise. I don't go through other routes. I don't try to call doctors to refer patients to me. I don't do any of those things. Fortunately, we have a steady stream of patients, some of them very sick, some of them are not responding to current drugs. So there is a huge need, and it has really helped these patients. So what you do is at the beginning, even before you do anything, you sign a non-disclosure agreements. You look at the trial design. They will send you great detail about what it is all about. You will usually get a flow sheet that tells you what is the order of things that have to be done. And you should have good cost accounting knowledge in order to budget correctly, okay? So everything is negotiable, right? So you have to know your operational cost over and above your cost per unit time of operating your business. So in my case, I have an integrated practice with both endoscopic services, clinical trials, and also clinical practice all in one roof. So I understand my cost pretty well, and you must account for these time that is wasted and time that is taken up sometimes with the trials. It is not as simple as I see a patient, I write a note, and I'm done. There will be so many queries back and forth. No matter how meticulous you are going to have queries coming back to you. Each one of those involves logging onto the computer, answering questions, referencing your source documents, clarifying things, repeating labs if necessary. It's very involved. It is not easy. Yeah. Honestly, it is not easy at all. Somebody has to be there to help you. Yeah. The risk is Of course, with a clinical trial, you're exposing yourself to litigation as well, right? So you have to be aware of that. You have to know where your comfort level is, what is your knowledge, how do you manage everything? How do you manage complications? You need to have a standard operating procedure for everything. So you need to have a policy and procedure manual, much as a hospital does in your practice. You have been to my practice and you have seen how in-depth everything is, right? So that is how it has to be. Without that level of connectivity to information and to the patients, you can't do these things.
Well, I think we'll start with why first. I mean, gastroenterologists traditionally have understood the value of ancillary services, and with consolidation, efforts to stay fiercely independent, whatever your track is with your practice as a gastroenterologist, we all realize the value of ancillaries, and sophisticated practices have really built their businesses around extending services around new ancillary lines. One of the bigger challenges in the ancillary world has been research, and there's a reason why only 5% of practices have clinical research, and we can talk about some of the challenges, but there's a tremendous upside for research, and we see it as a transformational ancillary service in gastroenterology that can really transform patient care. That's part of our tagline at ObjectiveGI. There's also a tremendous need in the research community in terms of pharma, a tremendous shortage of qualified sites to conduct clinical trials in most areas of research. So really a tremendous opportunity, but challenges. And we stepped in to that void to really address the need. We felt that a platform for conducting clinical trials in the busy workflow of the practice was in order. So we set out and created ObjectiveGI. We built this at the point of care. My co-founder and our CEO, Colleen Hoke, and myself started this company really with a few premises in mind. First of all, we knew that clinical research was most effective and most valuable when inserted at the point of care in an integrated way, where the clinical research literally runs alongside of the clinical team in terms of the day-to-day patient care. And we learned that patients were endeared to this model. They were seeing their physician more often as an investigator. They were getting education about chronic silent diseases like NASH. And their patient engagement experience was really tremendous. And so it really added value to the care paradigm. Second, when we built ObjectiveGI, we knew that we had to build a research platform that could be integrated into the workflow of the gastroenterologist. So we're busy transactional doctors. We're thinking procedures. We're thinking our ASC. How can I get out of the clinic to my ASC to do my scopes? And I understand that, having done it for almost 25 years now. So we knew if we were going to conduct research, it had to be done in a workflow-friendly way. We also wanted to select diseases and disease states that really were the future of GI. So as we know it now, we're being encouraged and directed to take care of the metabolic syndrome as gastroenterologists and bariatric care. And really the future is chronic disease management. And so as we started thinking about our focus and interests, we knew that we wanted it to be around the management of chronic diseases and oriented towards metabolism disorders. And fatty liver disease, of course, fits that mark quite well. We now have 14 sites across the U.S. involving approximately 150 providers. We started with NASH. I'm sure we'll talk about disease states and why in a moment, but we've been involved in over 25 NASH trials. So this is rather complex research. There's a tremendous need for this work. There's over 100 NASH trials currently underway, and five large phase 3 trials that will be starting in the coming quarters. So there's a tremendous opportunity here for us to do this work across our site network. For instance, if you think about a bariatric care program in a GI practice, easy to start slinging balloons down, but if you don't have a foundation upon which to build a sustainable program in bariatric care, then you're kind of stuck. But research really foundationally is the most credible way to lay the foundation for other and additional ancillary services. So it's a traditional joint venture model. Gastroenterologists are very familiar with this model in terms of the ASC structure. Is far less capital intensive than, say, starting an ambulatory surgery center or even a pathology lab. Of course, the capitalization is based on ownership in the joint venture partnership. We established a separate LLC. We have separate banking. Finances are completely transparent. There's no skimming off the top. It's not an MSO model. We have, of course, charges to expenses to the joint venture, which include fair market value payments to physicians, which is the clinical side of research. So physical exams, interpreting EKGs, laboratory testing, and some of the training that's involved. And we have a medical director in all of our programs. So there's fair market value payments to physicians, there's stipends to patients, there's occupancy costs on the expense side. We really love to lease space either in the footprint of the GI partner or very close to, in proximity to, and that helps with workflow. We talk about streamline and workflow efficiencies. It's good to be embedded or near the practice. We typically require about 1,200 square feet to build our research centers of excellence. And additional expenses would be, of course, employee expenses. Important to note that we hire, train, manage, and lease back the employees to the joint venture. So that's another really critical aspect. And then finally, there may be other expenses in terms of leasing. For instance, if we need to lease a fiber scan, our NASH research really requires a fiber scan for all our programs, so we can lease that through the joint venture. But all of those would be expenses, and then the profit split is based on ownership. We typically like to partner with groups that are 5 to 30 providers in size. It's important from the standpoint of having a few. We typically start with one principal investigator, and we like to have 2 to 3 sub-investigators. When it comes to, sort of investment, so it's typically going to be less than $100,000 on the practice side. We put in our money first. Our partners can invest their money incrementally as needed, and we're very flexible there. And the capital really is spent on standing up the site and getting it going. So, for instance, it takes about $20,000 to outfit a research center in terms of laboratory equipment and the like. And we have to hire and train the employees. We have to lease the space. And then we have to court our sponsor clients in terms of notifying them that we have a research center, identifying the trials that we think would be best suited for that new site, and then getting the pre-site selection visit where they sort of review the site and qualify the site, and then awarding the trial, then having a site initiation visit, and then subsequently having your first screen. And that's the first revenue event. So that whole trajectory takes about 4 months. Most of our research now is in NASH, and those trials are very competitive in terms of not enough sites for sponsors. And as we've developed our network, we've been able to command a premium. 3 parties sign the agreement. So the sponsor, ObjectiveGI, and the principal investigator at our site as a representative for the site. So the principal investigator has clear responsibilities that are well known and well established in clinical research. They are responsible for oversight of the trial. They're responsible for doing the clinical work, the clinical aspects of the trial. the record keeping, reviewing labs, and the regulatory and compliance issues, which we support very significantly through our platform. Now, what does ObjectiveGI bring? We bring the sponsor relationships. We have very deep relationships at the top of the scientific and clinical teams in the largest biopharma companies in the world, down to very small biotechs in the NASH space. And we bring those relationships, contracting, negotiating the contracts, budgeting. We have a quality assurance team that oversees and monitors and oversees and provides training in quality. We, of course, hire and manage the employees, as I mentioned earlier, and they're leased back to the joint venture. We do the revenue cycle management for clinical trials. We do a lot of internal training for our staff at our sites through our platform. And then our technology platform really is exceptional in helping to refine our processes and scale our processes across our sites and provide technology applications that create efficiencies in our system, that create better capabilities for pre-screening, for identifying patients for clinical trials.
So Clinical Research Strategy Group, the customers for CRSG are one, the site that really wants to build research but doesn't know how to get started, doesn't want to take the time to build or to figure out how to build infrastructure. The second customer in CRSG is the site that is already built and already running research, but maybe wants to take it to the next level, whether it's just increasing the profitability, increasing the geographic size, and scalability. But the key with that group is to really provide groups that want to do good research the tools to build the infrastructure and allow them to be sustainable long-term on their own. With precision research, precision is it's called a centrally integrated research network, or CERN. And what this is it's a network of really, really good GI clinical research sites around the country who have shown a lot of performance in the past, who already do good research. And what Precision does is contracts with pharmaceutical companies to bring studies. And once we bring the study to the research network, then we handle a lot of the pain points for the sites. We handle a lot of things like the startup, handle the contracting, we handle the budgeting, the regulatory, for instance, is all done for them. We build out the source documentation, we build out the study in the CTMS system, or clinical trials management system. So we do a lot of the heavy lifting, which allows the sites that are part of Precision to do what they do best, which is identify patients for trials and get them in and see the patients. So after medical school, I went right in. I got an offer from a pharmaceutical company to come into their medical affairs division, and I worked for 7 years in IBD at the pharmaceutical level as a medical science liaison, and then a liaison between clinical operations and medical affairs in the U.S. And so one of the things that allowed me to do is see a bunch of clinical research happening across the country. And I saw sites, both academic and community practice, and worked with those sites in clinical trials. And what I noticed was there were a lot of sites that were probably destined for failure in the next 5 years. In other words, the burden of doing research at their site was becoming so much that they weren't going to be able to kind of keep it going. And because of the burden and because of the pull of their regular practice, the doctors were probably at some point going to have to make a choice and decide whether or not they wanted to devote more time to this research effort, or whether they just wanted to continue their practice. Then went to work for TDDC and the GI Alliance, and worked with a great partner, Dr. Tim Ritter over there, where we, for 5 years, built that program to one of the premier GI clinical research programs in the U.S. And after that, I decided to really continue to do what what I think I love doing, which is helping sites become really, really good. So the basic reasons to, I think, to do research as an ancillary in the practice and to create an ancillary out of it are that it sort of helps everyone. If you look at it from the patient standpoint, the patients have access to those therapeutic advancements that most won't have access to for the next 10 years, and they have access to them today through clinical research. So it's a great way to bring those things to patients sooner. You know, what it does for patients who don't have insurance, for instance, is a great option there. It's a great way to be able to see the patient more. If you take IBD as an example, you know, I think all of us believe that in the ideal world, we'd be able to see our patients sooner than let's say 6 months for a visit. And with research, you're able to do that. You're able to see your patients on a graduated scale to make sure that their disease is being aided by the approach that you're using. Mm-hmm. It's better patient touch. So that's what it does for the patient. For the practice, you know, I think to our point, it can certainly be an ancillary. You know, we look at these research visits, and I think ideal to me in my mind is an average patient visit in research generating around $1,700 to $1,800 per visit. And a coordinator, when I look at how many visits a coordinator ought to have over the course of a month, generally speaking, what great looks like to me is somewhere between 20 to 30. So if you multiply, let's say, 20 visits by about $1,800 per visit, you can see that if you have the patients in your practice and you bring research into the practice, it doesn't take long to really grow to a point where it can become a good ancillary. Mm-hmm. So that's the direct value for the practice. The indirect value is that not every practice has research. And so the way you're viewed in the community, if you have a research program going on at your clinic, may be much different than the gastroenterology practice down the street. And that could impact things like referrals. As you get referrals in from primary care, that could impact the way that patients sort of view your practice if you have research. So there's both a direct and an indirect value to having research in the practice. Mm-hmm. And then the last part is profit. So if it helps the patient, if it helps the practice, does it help the bottom line? And, you know, the way that research runs in a lot of cases in practice, it's kind of a break-even type of prospect. But there's a way and a method to really making research become profitable. So if you like the first two pieces, if you believe that it helps the patient, if you believe that it helps both directly and indirectly the practice, there's a way to get to profitability. One of the things that we rely on heavily is a clinical trials management system. It's sort of like an EMR for research, and it allows a lot of transparency into the program. It also allows us to draw metrics on the program. One of the things that you see, that I see often in clinical research programs, is if you ask the site how they're doing in research, they say, "Oh, we're doing phenomenally well." Okay, well, how many visits are your coordinators having per month? I don't know, but they're busy, is the answer you a lot of times get. What we can do with a clinical trials management system, though, is start to put some metrics in place so that the entire practice has an idea of how we're really doing. So in other words, how many visits are we conducting over the course of a month? How much per average visit are we getting? And that allows us to be able to, over month, start to see trends. And so in the practices that I work with, we definitely, if we don't already have a CTMS system in place, we'll work to get one in place so that we can kind of draw on some of those metrics. So that's an important step. The other things that we do to get started are we create SOPs, standard operating procedures, that represent what the sponsors want to see out of research and what the FDA wants to see out of research. We create a corrective and preventative action plan, or CAPA plan. A CAPA plan is what we use whenever something goes wrong in research and we have a protocol deviation to make sure it doesn't happen again. Start to establish a budget for the sites, again, based upon the actual value of the time that they'll spend in studies. And we put together justification letters so that when the sponsor comes back and says, well, we can't really give you X number for this particular procedure, you say, hey, look, that's my policy here at the site. Mm-hmm. And so holding tight to some of the things that you know are a reasonable cost, a reasonable value for the practice is important. Not taking less than what you're worth. The role that we play at the site is more of a co-directorship, right? So we really partner with that site, and I'm on calls multiple times a week with each of the sites that we work with to make sure that things are going the right direction. So there is a cost involved, obviously, as with any ancillary. If you build an infusion center, you're going to have to buy infusion pumps, you're going to have to buy chairs, you're going to have to do all of that. And so the equipment costs for what you need to do research, refrigerators, a freezer, and the centrifuge, things like that. The cost for all of those is around $15,000 for per site. So if you want to do multiple sites, it's going to be sort of amplified there. Again, the cost of the CTMS system is nominal. And then CRSG can work in many different models, either to help identify staff that the practice could hire, or we're considering models where we would actually find the staff ourselves. And so depending upon what the practice wants to do, depending on what their level of risk, what kind of level of risk they are looking for, we can work within those constructs. And it's important to do it individually. So rather than having just a sort of one-size-fits-all kind of program, we're able to look at what the site's needs are and what the site's desires are. Now, obviously, if they take on a lot of the risk, they're going to keep the majority of the profits in that case. If we're taking on a lot of the risk, then the profit shifts to this side. So there's a lot of IBD research. Crohn's and ulcerative colitis in both phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 2, remember, the shorter term studies. Phase 3 are the longer term studies, sometimes out to 7 years. So there's a lot of work in IBD that needs to be done that is on offer right now. There's also work on the luminal side in eosinophilic esophagitis, celiac disease, and many, many others. On the hepatology side, there are NASH trials, and I always recommend that sites consider broadening out their scope. So